Imagine a nation built on dreams of freedom, yet torn apart by chains that bound millions. Could slavery really spark the deadliest war in American history? Let's step back to the early days of America, where the seeds of division were planted deep in the soil. From the 1600s, African slavery took root in the British colonies, especially in the South, where vast plantations grew cotton, tobacco, and rice, all powered by the forced labor of enslaved people. Picture the brutal reality. Families ripped apart at auctions, men and women toiling under the scorching sun from dawn till dusk, their lives controlled by overseers with whips and chains. But here's where it gets interesting. The North was building factories and cities, relying on free workers, while the South's entire economy depended on slavery, making it what they called their peculiar institution. As America expanded westward in the 1800s, the big question exploded. Should new territories allow slavery or ban it? You see, Southern leaders feared that without expansion, slavery would die out, crippling their way of life. Tensions boiled over with deals like the Missouri Compromise in 1820, which tried to balance slave and free states, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, declared Mississippi when things heated up, showing just how central it was to their identity. Northern abolitionists, fueled by moral outrage, pushed back hard, saying slavery was an evil that clashed with America's ideals of liberty. Little did they know, these clashes were building toward an unstoppable storm. Envision crowded halls in Congress, fiery debates echoing as politicians from North and South hurled accusations, each side convinced they were fighting for the soul of the nation. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a man who opposed slavery's spread, was the final spark. Southern states saw it as a direct threat, whispering of secession in smoke-filled rooms. But as the Union teetered on the edge, one man in the White House faced an impossible choice. Would Lincoln bend to preserve peace, or stand firm and risk everything? Picture a tall, lanky man stepping into the White House in 1861, carrying the weight of a fracturing nation on his shoulders. Abraham Lincoln, a self-taught lawyer from Illinois who hated slavery with every fiber of his being, yet knew one wrong move could shatter the Union forever. You see, Lincoln had always called himself anti-slavery, saying things like, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." But he wasn't ready to abolish it outright. He believed the Constitution tied his hands, and his top priority was keeping the country together, no matter what. As the Civil War erupted, with southern states seceding and battles raging, Lincoln wrestled with this inner turmoil, confiding to friends that he'd free every slave if it saved the Union, or leave them all in chains if that's what it took. But pressure mounted from all sides. Radical Republicans in Congress, fiery voices like Senator Charles Sumner and Benjamin Wade, hammered him relentlessly to strike at slavery's heart, calling for an Emancipation Proclamation to turn the war into a moral crusade. They saw Lincoln as too cautious, too slow, while border states like Kentucky and Missouri, still loyal but slave-holding, warned that any bold move against slavery would push them into the Confederacy's arms, dooming the Union's cause. Imagine Lincoln pacing the White House halls late at night, drafts of speeches scattered on his desk as letters poured in demanding action. He even wrote to editor Horace Greeley in August 1862, publicly declaring, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery," a clever way to buy time while he secretly prepared something revolutionary. Little did the world know, by July of that year, Lincoln had already shared a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation with his cabinet, framing it as a military necessity to weaken the South. But he held back, waiting for a Union victory to make it stick. The emotional pull was real. Stories of escaped slaves flooding Union lines tugged at his heart, and his own words echoed a deep wish for all men to be free. Yet the political tightrope grew thinner with every passing day. As defeats piled up and calls for change grew louder, Lincoln faced his greatest test. Could he balance his moral compass with the raw demands of war without losing everything? Can you imagine a single day of unimaginable carnage becoming the spark that ignited freedom for millions? How did the bloodiest battle in American history hand Lincoln the key to ending slavery? Let's transport you to the summer of 1862, where the Civil War raged on with Confederate General Robert E. Lee boldly invading the North, aiming to crush Union spirits and maybe even win foreign support for the South. Picture the Union Army, battered from defeats like the Second Battle of Bull Run, where waves of gray-clad soldiers overran Federal lines, leaving fields littered with the fallen and pushing Lincoln to the brink as calls for emancipation grew louder. But here's where fate twisted. Lee marched into Maryland, hoping to rally support, only to face off against Union General George McClellan near the quiet town of Sharpsburg by Antietam Creek on September 17th. Envision the dawn breaking over a cornfield turned slaughterhouse, where soldiers charged through tall stalks, muskets blazing, and the air thick with smoke and screams, as over 3,600 men fell in just hours, what survivors called the bloodiest day America has ever seen. You feel the chaos. Union troops storming a sunken road that became known as Bloody Lane, bodies piling up like cordwood, while artillery thundered and wounded cried out for water under the relentless sun. Little did Lee know, his ambitious plan was crumbling. McClellan, armed with Lee's lost battle orders wrapped around cigars found by chance, held the line just enough to claim a tactical draw, forcing Lee to retreat back south and handing the Union its first glimmer of hope in the East. The emotional toll was staggering. Families received telegrams of loss, but for enslaved people whispering in the shadows, this victory meant something profound. Lincoln, waiting for just such a moment to avoid looking desperate, seized it to announce his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation 5 days later, promising freedom to slaves in rebel states come January. As the guns fell silent and the wounded were carted away, the war's purpose shifted forever. But would this fragile win truly unlock the chains, or invite even greater fury from the Confederacy? What if a wartime strategy, born from careful planning and battlefield momentum, could promise freedom to millions and redefine a nation's fight? How was this groundbreaking decree carefully shaped and set into motion? Step into the tense months of 1862 amid a raging civil war, where a preliminary version of the proclamation was first announced in September, warning rebellious states that if they didn't end their fight by January 1st, 1863, enslaved people within their borders would be declared free as a necessary military measure to weaken the opposition. Envision the behind-the-scenes discussions among advisors, where initial doubts arose over timing and radical changes, but a key Union success at the Battle of Antietam provided the needed boost, allowing the announcement to proceed just days later and framing it as an essential step to disrupt the enemy's resources. This early draft cleverly limited its reach to areas still in rebellion, sparing loyal regions to maintain alliances, while positioning the act under executive war powers to target the use of forced labor supporting the opposing forces. As the deadline approached, refinements were made, including provisions to welcome suitable freed individuals into military service, turning the promise of liberty into active participation in the cause. Finally, on January 1st, 1863, the full proclamation took effect, declaring that all held in bondage in designated rebellious areas are, and henceforward shall be free, blending military strategy with a call for justice and adding moral strength to the ongoing struggle. You can sense the growing anticipation and hope it sparked among those longing for change, shifting the war toward broader ideals of freedom. But with its success tied to continued victories, would this bold step truly transform the conflict, or face fierce pushback? Picture the stroke of a pen echoing like thunder across a divided nation. What happens when a president's words unleash freedom's storm, sparking joy in some hearts and fury in others? As news of the Emancipation Proclamation spread like wildfire on January 1st, 1863, Union supporters erupted in celebration, crowds gathering in Boston and New York with fireworks and speeches, hailing Lincoln as a liberator who had finally made the war a righteous fight against slavery, boosting morale and drawing in abolitionists who saw it as a moral triumph that would strengthen their cause. But here's where the drama intensifies. Confederate leaders exploded in rage, with President Jefferson Davis calling it a barbaric act that would incite slave uprisings, labeling it the most execrable measure recorded in the history of guilty man, and vowing retaliation. while Southern newspapers screamed of impending chaos and white families feared revolts in the night. Envision the enslaved people in the South, whispering the news in hidden corners of plantations, their eyes lighting up with hope as thousands began fleeing toward Union lines, risking everything for a taste of freedom, turning the proclamation into a beacon that said, "You're not forgotten. Fight for your liberty." Overseas, the reactions rippled across the Atlantic. In Britain and France, where leaders had toyed with recognizing the Confederacy, the document shifted opinions, winning over anti-slavery publics and making foreign intervention politically toxic, as one English worker declared it, the death knell of slavery. Yet not everyone cheered. Even in the North, Copperhead Democrats decried it as an unconstitutional power grab that would lead to racial chaos, stirring riots and political backlash that tested Lincoln's resolve. With waves of ecstasy, anger, and uncertainty crashing everywhere, this bold decree had lit a fuse. But would it unite the North's forces, or ignite an even deadlier phase of the war? Imagine men once bound in chains picking up rifles to fight for their own freedom. How did the Emancipation Proclamation turn former slaves into an unstoppable force that reshaped the Civil War? Let's dive into the aftermath of January 1st, 1863, when Lincoln's decree didn't just promise liberty, but boldly invited such persons of suitable condition to join the Union Army and Navy, opening the doors for Black Americans to enlist and strike back at the very system that had oppressed them for generations. Picture the rush. Thousands of free Black men from the North and escaped slaves from the South flooding recruitment stations, their faces etched with determination as they traded plows for muskets, forming regiments like the famous 54th Massachusetts, where soldiers like Sergeant William Kearny would charge into battles like Fort Wagner, holding the Union flag high, even as bullets flew and comrades fell. But here's the real game changer. By war's end, nearly 200,000 Black troops had joined the fight, making up about 10% of the Union forces. Their presence not only bolstering numbers, but injecting fresh morale and proving their valor in brutal clashes from Vicksburg to Petersburg, where they faced discrimination in pay and equipment yet fought with a fire that said, "This is our war too." You can feel the shift on the battlefields. Confederate soldiers, already strained by labor shortages as slaves fled plantations, now confronted these soldiers of liberation who disrupted supply lines and turned the tide in key victories. While back home, stories of their heroism inspired more to escape and enlist, weakening the South's economy and spirit. Little did the Confederacy know, this influx of Black fighters was dismantling their rebellion from within, adding a moral thunder to the Union's cause that echoed across the globe. As these brave men marched forward, carving paths to victory, the question loomed: would their sacrifices seal freedom's promise? Or would the nation truly honor the legacy they forged in blood? What if a wartime promise of freedom didn't just end a conflict, but ignited a century-long battle for true equality? How has the Emancipation Proclamation echoed through American history, shaping everything from constitutional amendments to modern civil rights? Let's journey beyond the Civil War's smoke-filled battlefields to the turbulent era of Reconstruction, where the proclamation's bold stroke freed over 3 million enslaved people in Confederate states, but left slavery lingering in border areas, pushing Congress to ratify the 13th Amendment in 1865, which finally abolished it nationwide and turned Lincoln's military measure into unbreakable law. Picture the hope blooming in freed communities as Black families reunited, built schools, and even elected leaders during radical Reconstruction, with the Freedmen's Bureau providing aid and the 14th and 15th Amendments granting citizenship, equal protection, and voting rights to Black men, allowing figures like Hiram Revels to become the first Black U.S. Senator in a stunning reversal of fortunes. But here's where the heartbreak unfolds. Southern white resistance erupted through groups like the Ku Klux Klan, unleashing terror with lynchings and violence to suppress Black progress, while Jim Crow laws soon segregated society and stripped away those hard-won rights, turning Reconstruction's promise into a nightmare of unparalleled violence and oppression that betrayed the proclamation's spirit. You can almost hear the echoes of Frederick Douglass praising it as a moral bombshell that redefined America, yet the unfinished work lingered, inspiring the civil rights movement of the 1960s, where leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. invoked its legacy to fight for voting rights and end segregation, proving its enduring power as a symbol of liberty's unfinished journey. Little did Lincoln know, his decree would ripple globally, influencing anti-colonial struggles and human rights worldwide. But in America, it stood as a beacon reminding us that freedom's fight is never truly over. As we reflect on this legacy of triumph and tragedy, one question remains. In a nation still grappling with inequality, will we finally fulfill the promise of true liberty for all?